Let's try something together. Not later. Not after the video. Right now. Close your mouth gently. Let your teeth stay slightly apart. Take a slow breath in through your nose, and as you breathe out, make a soft, steady sound. Don't force it. Just let the sound exist. Hold it for a few seconds. Now stop. Something subtle just happened, and you probably noticed it immediately, even if you couldn't quite explain it. The sound wasn't just something you heard, it was something you felt. You may have felt a faint buzzing around your lips, a soft vibration in your cheeks, maybe even a pressure-like sensation behind your eyes or in the center of your forehead. Some people notice it in their throat, others in their chest. It's not dramatic, it's not overwhelming, but it is unmistakably there. Now pause for a moment and consider this carefully. That sensation did not come from the outside world. No object touched your face. No external force pressed against your skin. And yet, your brain reported a physical feeling distributed across multiple parts of your body. Already this is interesting, because it means your brain is responding not just to external events, but to signals generated entirely within your own body. Let's stay with direct observation, the way a careful physicist would. When you hum, a few simple physical processes begin at the same time. Air is pushed out of your lungs in a slow, controlled stream. As it passes through your throat, it causes two small folds of tissue, your vocal cords, to vibrate rapidly. These vibrations create sound waves. But unlike speaking, humming keeps your mouth closed. That means the sound has nowhere obvious to go. So instead of projecting outward into the room, much of that vibration is redirected inward, into your skull. Your head, in a very real sense, becomes a resonating structure. Not perfectly shaped, not uniform, but complex and alive. Filled with bone, soft tissue, fluid, and small air cavities called sinuses. The vibration spreads through all of it. It's a bit like striking a tuning fork and then pressing it gently against a wooden table. The table begins to vibrate too, not because it's designed to, but because it can. Your skull behaves in a similar way. And this is where things begin to blur the line between what we normally call sound and what we call touch. Because the vibration is not only detected by your ears, it is also detected by receptors in your skin, in your muscles, even in deeper tissues. So when you hum, you are not just hearing a tone, you are immersed in it. You are both producing the signal and physically experiencing its consequences at the same time. Now think about how unusual that is. Most of the time, your senses are responding to the external world. Light entering your eyes, air vibrations entering your ears, pressure on your skin. But humming creates a closed loop. The source of the signal and the receiver of the signal are the same system, you, and for a brief moment, your brain is processing a world that you are entirely generating from within. That's where the real question begins. Now let's take that observation one step further and look more closely at what your head is actually doing during that simple hum. Imagine for a moment that your skull is not solid in the way you usually think of it, not like a brick or a stone. Instead, think of it as a complicated, uneven chamber, more like a cave system than a block. Inside this structure, there are hollow spaces, your sinuses, along with dense bone, soft tissue, blood, and fluid. Each of these materials responds to vibration in a slightly different way. Some parts transmit it quickly, others absorb it, others reflect it back. So when your vocal cords begin vibrating, they don't send out a clean, simple wave. They create a complex pattern of motion that spreads through this entire internal landscape. The vibration travels through bone particularly well. In fact, solid structures can carry these vibrations more efficiently than air in some cases. This is why if you've ever placed your ear against a table, you can hear faint sounds traveling through it much more clearly than through the air. Your skull is doing something similar. As you hum, vibrations move upward from your throat into your jaw, your cheekbones, your nasal cavity, and even the bones around your eyes. They bounce, overlap, and interfere with each other, creating a constantly shifting pattern. Now here's where it becomes more interesting. These vibrations don't just stay in the structure of your skull. They reach a very delicate system buried deep inside your head, your inner ear. Normally, your inner ear is designed to detect sound waves coming from the outside world. Air vibrates, your eardrum moves, and those vibrations are passed along through tiny bones into a fluid-filled structure called the cochlea. But when you hum, you partially bypass that entire pathway. Instead of entering through the ear canal, the vibrations arrive through the bones of your skull. This is called bone conduction, so your inner ear is being stimulated from the inside. This creates a very unusual situation for your brain, because now the signal it's receiving doesn't follow the usual route. There's no external source to locate, no distance to estimate, no direction to calculate. It's just there, generated internally, received internally, and yet your brain still interprets it as sound. This raises a subtle but important question. What does it actually mean to hear something? Is hearing defined by where the signal comes from, or by how the brain processes it once it arrives? Because in this case, the boundary between internal and external begins to dissolve. You are producing vibrations. Those vibrations stimulate your inner ear. Your brain interprets the signal, but the entire loop exists within you. There is no clear separation between cause and perception, and because of that, the experience of humming feels different from listening to a sound in the environment. It feels more intimate, more immediate, less like observing something, and more like being part of it. Your skull is not just containing the sound, it is shaping it. And your brain is not just receiving the signal, it is participating in a system where the distinction between sender and receiver is no longer clean. That's a very strange situation when you think about it carefully, because it suggests that even something as ordinary as a hum is not simply a sound. It is a physical process distributed across your entire head, one that turns your body into both the instrument and the listener at the same time. Now consider what happens next, not in your skull, but in your brain. Up to this point, we've been talking about vibrations, physical movements traveling through bone and tissue. But the brain does not directly experience vibration. It deals in electrical signals. So somehow those internal vibrations must be converted into patterns of neural activity. This conversion happens in your inner ear, where tiny structures translate mechanical motion into electrical impulses. These signals then travel along nerves into the brain, where they are processed, interpreted, and somehow experienced. But here's where things become less straightforward. Your brain is not a passive receiver of information. It doesn't simply wait for signals and then display them like a screen. Instead, it is constantly predicting what it expects to happen next. At every moment, your brain is generating internal models of the world, quiet guesses about what sounds, sights, and sensations should occur. Incoming signals are compared against these predictions. If something unexpected happens, a loud noise, a sudden movement, your brain reacts strongly, attention increases, alertness rises. But when the input matches the prediction closely, something different happens. The brain relaxes its response. Now think about humming. When you hum, the sound is steady, continuous, highly predictable. There are no sudden changes, no surprises, no irregular patterns. Even before the signal arrives, your brain already knows what it's going to be like because you are the one generating it. So when the signal reaches the brain, it matches the prediction almost perfectly. And when that happens, the brain reduces the importance of the signal. In a way, it says, this is expected, nothing new here. This doesn't mean the signal disappears, you still hear and feel it. But the brain doesn't treat it as urgent. This has an interesting consequence, because your brain has limited processing capacity. It cannot treat every signal as equally important. So when one signal becomes predictable and less demanding, resources become available for other processes, or for a general reduction in an activity. Some researchers describe this as a decrease in neural noise. Not noise in the sense of sound, but in the sense of random, uncoordinated activity in the brain. When the system is dealing with uncertainty, activity becomes more scattered. When things are predictable, activity can become more organized, more stable. Humming, by its nature, introduces a simple, repeating pattern into this system, and the brain seems to respond by settling slightly. But here is the important part. This is not a switch being flipped. There is no single calm center turning on. Instead, it is a distributed effect across many interacting regions. Some areas process sound, others track body sensations, others regulate attention and internal state. All of these are influenced, in small ways, by the steady, self-generated signal. And because these systems are interconnected, even a small shift can propagate. It's like placing a metronome in a room full of moving objects. Nothing is forced to synchronize, but over time, certain patterns begin to align. Simply because a stable rhythm is present, your hum becomes that rhythm. And your brain, which is always searching for patterns, begins to align parts of its activity with it. Now ask yourself something slightly unsettling. If a simple, steady vibration, produced by your own body, can alter the pattern of activity in your brain, then how much of what you experience as your normal state is simply the result of ongoing patterns you rarely notice? Because humming doesn't introduce something entirely new. It reveals how sensitive the system already is, and how easily it can be nudged. Now shift your attention away from sound and towards something even more fundamental: the slow rhythm of your breathing. You may not have noticed it at first, but the moment you began humming, your breathing changed. It had to, because humming can only happen while you exhale. This creates a constraint, a rule your body must follow. You take in air, and then you release it slowly, steadily, as a continuous vibration. That alone is already unusual. Most of the time, your breathing is irregular. It adjusts automatically, faster when you're active, slower when you're resting, shallow when you're tense, deeper when you're relaxed. You don't consciously control it, and you rarely observe it. But humming forces a pattern onto this otherwise flexible system. Inhale, pause, long controlled exhale. And that long exhale turns out to matter more than it seems. To understand why, imagine you are watching an animal in the wild. You don't need to know anything about its thoughts. You don't need language. You simply observe its breathing. If the animal is in danger, its breathing becomes rapid and uneven. Quick inhales, quick exhales, sometimes even holding the breath. The entire system prepares for immediate action. But if the animal is safe, truly safe, its breathing slows down. Exhales become longer. Movements become less abrupt. In other words, breathing is not just a response to internal state, it is also a signal. Now here is the interesting reversal. If breathing reflects internal state, can it also influence it? Humming quietly tests this idea. By extending your exhale, you are producing a pattern that resembles what your body normally does when there is no immediate threat. But instead of waiting for safety to cause the breathing change, you create the breathing pattern first. And your brain receives that information, not as a thought, not as a belief, but as a physical signal coming from your body. There are sensors in your lungs, in your chest, in your blood vessels. They track pressure, stretch, oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels. All of this information is continuously sent to the brain. So when you extend your exhale through humming, several small changes occur at once. Air leaves your lungs more slowly. Carbon dioxide levels shift slightly. The muscles involved in breathing maintain a steady contraction instead of rapid movement. These changes are subtle. You don't consciously detect them, but your brain does, and it has learned over millions of years of biological history to associate certain patterns with certain conditions. Slow, steady exhalation tends to correlate with safety, rest, and low urgency. So when that pattern appears, even if it is artificially created, the brain begins to adjust. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. Activity in certain systems decreases. Signals related to vigilance soften slightly. The overall state shifts just a bit toward stability. But we have to be careful here. It would be easy to say humming calms you down. That sounds clean and simple, but reality is more complicated, because not everyone experiences the same effect. The magnitude varies, the timing varies, and in some cases, the effect is barely noticeable. This tells us something important. The brain is not responding to a single cause. It is integrating multiple streams of information. Breathing, vibration, expectation, internal chemistry, all at once. Humming is just one way of influencing that system. A small input into a much larger network. And yet even that small input is enough to reveal something deeper. That your internal state is not fixed. It is continuously being shaped by patterns, many of which you can alter, even without fully understanding how. Now move one layer deeper, beneath the sensations and beneath the breathing, into a system that operates quietly in the background of almost everything you experience. Running through your body is a vast network of nerves that you rarely notice. Not the ones that let you move your fingers or feel a surface, but the ones that regulate your internal organs, your heart, your lungs, your digestion. This is often called the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic simply means it functions largely on its own. You don't decide to increase your heart rate moment by moment. You don't consciously instruct your stomach to release enzymes. These processes are managed automatically based on signals flowing continuously between your brain and your body. Within this system, there are different modes of operation. One mode is associated with action, mobilizing energy, increasing alertness, preparing for rapid response. Another mode is associated with maintenance, slowing things down, conserving energy, supporting long-term processes like repair and digestion. These are not switches that flip cleanly from one to the other. They are more like tendencies, constantly shifting in balance. Now, somewhere within this network is a long wandering nerve that connects many of your internal organs to your brain. It carries information in both directions, signals from the body to the brain, and instructions from the brain back to the body. What makes this nerve interesting is not that it controls a single function, but that it participates in many. Heart rate, breathing patterns, subtle changes in muscle tone, even aspects of vocalization. When you hum, several of these pathways are influenced at once. The muscles in your throat engage in a steady, controlled way. Air moves slowly through your airways. Vibrations occur in regions that are physically close to where this nerve branches. None of this directly activates a single response. But it changes the pattern of signals traveling through the system, and because the brain is constantly monitoring these signals, even small changes can alter how the overall state is regulated. Imagine a large control room filled with dials instead of switches. Each dial adjusts something slightly: temperature, pressure, flow. No single dial defines the system, but turning several at once begins to shift the overall condition. Humming is like turning a few of those dials gently, in a coordinated way. The rhythm of your exhale, the vibration in your throat, the predictable sensory feedback, all of these contribute small inputs. The brain receives them, integrates them, and adjusts its output accordingly. This may include slight changes in heart rate variability, subtle shifts in breathing depth, or minor adjustments in how reactive certain systems are. But here's the critical point. These changes are not precise. They are not identical from one person to another, and they are not fully understood. You can measure aspects of the system, electrical activity, chemical signals, timing between heartbeats, but translating those measurements into lived experience remains difficult. Because the system is not linear, it doesn't behave like a simple machine where one input produces one predictable output. It behaves more like a complex network where many small influences interact, sometimes reinforcing each other, sometimes canceling out. So when people describe humming as soothing or grounding, they are describing the result of this network shifting slightly. But the exact pathway from vibration to experience is still unclear, and that uncertainty is not a weakness in the explanation. It is a reflection of how intricate the system actually is. Humming doesn't reveal a hidden mechanism with a simple answer. It reveals a system so interconnected that even the smallest action, like producing a quiet sound, can ripple through it in ways we are only beginning to map. Now consider something even less visible than nerves or vibrations, the chemistry quietly shifting inside your body while you hum. At first glance, it might seem unlikely that a simple sound could influence anything chemical. After all, humming feels mechanical, air moving, tissues vibrating. But in biological systems, mechanical changes and chemical changes are rarely separate. They are deeply connected. As you hum, air flows steadily through your nasal passages rather than rapidly in and out of your mouth. This slow movement of air interacts with the lining of your nasal cavity, which is not just empty space, it is an active surface, constantly producing and regulating various molecules. One of these molecules is nitric oxide. It's a small, simple gas, but it plays multiple roles in the body. It can cause blood vessels to widen, which changes how blood flows. It can influence how oxygen is delivered to tissues. It even participates in signaling processes between cells. When you hum, the vibration and airflow in your nasal passages appear to increase the production or release of this molecule. The exact mechanism is still being studied, but measurements show that levels of nitric oxide in the nasal air can rise significantly during humming compared to quiet breathing. Now, what does that mean for your brain? That's where things become less clear. Nitric oxide can affect blood flow, and blood flow affects how much oxygen and nutrients reach different parts of the brain. In principle, this could influence neural activity. But the brain is not a simple engine, where more fuel directly means more output. It regulates its own blood supply very carefully, adjusting flow based on local activity. So even if nitric oxide changes conditions slightly, the downstream effects are complex and not fully predictable. And nitric oxide is only one piece of the chemical picture. As your breathing slows and your body shifts its internal rhythms, other chemical signals may change as well. Carbon dioxide levels in your blood may rise slightly during prolonged exhalation. This in turn can influence the acidity of your blood, which affects how oxygen is released from hemoglobin. Small changes in these variables can alter how efficiently oxygen is delivered, not just to your muscles, but to your brain. Again, these are not dramatic shifts. They are subtle adjustments, occurring within a tightly regulated range. But the brain is sensitive to patterns, not just extremes. Even small, consistent changes in the chemical environment can influence how networks of neurons behave. Some may become slightly more or less active. Certain rhythms may become more stable. Others may fade into the background. But here is the difficult part. We can measure many of these chemical changes individually. We can detect nitric oxide levels. We can track oxygen saturation. We can observe carbon dioxide fluctuations. What we cannot easily do is connect these measurements directly to subjective experience. We cannot say, with precision, this exact increase in nitric oxide produces this exact feeling. Because the experience you report, calmness, focus, stillness, is not generated by a single chemical. It emerges from the interaction of many processes happening at once. Chemistry, electricity, structure, and feedback loops, all intertwined. So when you hum for 60 seconds, your internal environment does change. The composition of the air in your nasal passages shifts. The balance of gases in your blood adjusts slightly. The flow of blood through certain vessels may alter. But these are not isolated events. They are part of a continuous system that is always changing, always adapting. Humming doesn't introduce chemistry into a static system. It gently redirects a system that was already in motion. And what you feel is not the chemical itself, but the brain's interpretation of a body that has, in small and measurable ways, become different from what it was a minute before. Now we arrive at a point where the explanation becomes less comfortable, because it forces us to confront a limitation. Up to now, we've been able to describe mechanisms, vibrations moving through bone, signals traveling along nerves, chemical levels shifting in small but measurable ways. These are things we can observe, test, and quantify. But when you hum for 60 seconds, something else happens that doesn't fit neatly into those measurements. You experience something. Maybe it's a slight calm, maybe a sense of steadiness, maybe just a subtle change in how your thoughts are moving. And here is the problem. We can describe the physical processes in great detail, but we cannot fully explain why those processes feel like anything at all. This is where science reaches an edge. Your brain is made of cells. Those cells communicate using electrical signals and chemical exchanges. This much is clear. We can map pathways, record activity, and even predict certain responses. But nowhere in that description do we find the feeling itself. There is no single neuron that contains calmness. No identifiable structure where the sensation of humming exists as a physical object. Instead, there are patterns, large-scale patterns of activity distributed across many regions of the brain. And somehow, this is the part we do not understand, those patterns correspond to subjective experience. When you hum, your brain activity changes in response to predictable input, altered breathing, and shifting internal signals. That much follows from everything we've discussed. But why should that change feel like something? Why should a pattern of electrical activity produce the sense of being present inside your own head, noticing a vibration, noticing a shift? We don't have a complete answer. And this is not a small gap in knowledge, it is a fundamental one. Because it applies not just to humming, but to every experience you've ever had. Seeing light, hearing music, feeling temperature, thinking a thought. In all cases, there is a translation happening. Physical processes become experience, but the mechanism of that translation is unknown. Now consider how this connects back to humming. When you hum, you are altering physical variables in your body in simple, measurable ways. You can describe those changes without any reference to experience at all. But the moment you ask, what does it feel like, you are entering a different domain, and the two domains do not align cleanly. You can increase nitric oxide levels without producing calmness. You can slow breathing without eliminating anxiety. You can generate steady vibrations without changing your awareness in any obvious way. So whatever humming is doing, it is not operating through a single pathway. It is interacting with a system that is already generating experience continuously, and that system is not fully understood. This leads to an uncomfortable but important conclusion. Even in a situation as simple as humming for 1 minute, we can only explain part of what is happening. We can describe the structure, we can measure the activity, but we cannot fully account for the experience. And that means that something as ordinary as a quiet contains hidden inside it one of the deepest unsolved problems in science. Not how the brain works, but how the brain becomes a mind. Now take a step back and look at the entire situation from a wider perspective. You began with something extremely simple, a quiet, steady hum lasting about a minute. No special equipment, no complex training, no external input required, and yet by following that one action carefully, you were led through layers of reality that are anything but simple. At the surface, there was sound vibrations moving through air and bone. Just beneath that, there was structure, your skull acting as a resonating system, shaping how those vibrations travel. Below that, there was neural processing, signals converted, transmitted, compared against predictions, and integrated into patterns of activity. Deeper still, there were regulatory systems, breathing rhythms, nerve pathways, and internal feedback loops adjusting in subtle ways. And beneath all of that, there was chemistry, molecules shifting, gases exchanging, blood flow adapting moment by moment. Each layer can be studied, each layer can be measured, at least in part, and yet none of these layers alone explains what you actually experienced, because the experience is not located in any single place. It is not in the vibration itself, not in the neurons, not in the chemicals. It emerges from the interaction of all of them. Now here is where things become slightly unsettling. You normally think of your experience as a direct reflection of reality. You see the world, you hear sounds, you feel sensations. It all seems immediate and obvious. But humming reveals something different. It shows that your experience can be altered by changes that never leave your own body. No external event is required. You generate a signal internally, and that signal changes how your brain organizes its activity, and therefore how your experience unfolds. In other words, part of what you experience as reality is constructed from within, not in a vague or philosophical sense, but in a very physical, measurable way. The boundaries between inside and outside are not as clear as they seem. When you hear a sound from the environment, your brain processes it. When you hum, your brain processes that too. In both cases, what you actually perceive is not the raw vibration, but the brain's interpretation of it. And those interpretations can be influenced by factors that have nothing to do with the external world. This leads to a quiet but important shift in perspective. The world you experience is not simply received, it is actively assembled. Moment by moment, your brain combines incoming signals with internal activity, expectations, and ongoing patterns to produce what feels like a stable reality. Humming does not break this system, it reveals it. It shows that even a small controlled change in your own body can alter the structure of your experience. And if that is true for something as simple as a hum, then it raises a broader question. How much of what you take to be fixed, your mood, your focus, your sense of presence, is actually the result of dynamic processes that could in principle be shifted? Not easily, not completely, but perhaps more than you assume. And this does not lead to a comforting conclusion or a dramatic one. It leads to a precise and slightly disorienting realization. You are not just observing reality, you are participating in its construction. And sometimes, all it takes to notice that is a sound that never leaves your own head.